Hello, everybody. This is Spectral Sailor, and we are doing an early show again, kind of like last Monday when we interviewed A. And we're going to welcome a writer, probably a creative soul, John Brassard. Is that how you say it, Brassard?
That's close enough for me.
All right. And he's going to tell us about some things he's done, some projects or some books that he's worked on and helped out with and done himself. And maybe we'll pick his brain about some future projects and see if he gives us anything.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. So, my first question, we used to ask this question all the time because it's not your normal question that you ask anybody, really. What inspires you? What inspires you to do what you do? And tell everybody about what you do, actually, like you're an author, right?
I am an author. And the reason I do what I do is that I'm weird. That's why.
Good reason.
I've always, I am actually a trained historian. I have a degree in history from Iowa State University. We'll go ahead and give them a quick shout out. I always had an interest in oddball history. I mean, I've always had a thing for paranormal, for true crime, for sometimes just stories that you don't normally hear about. And I remember I grew up in rural Iowa, and I would talk to people, and you'd talk about people in the neighborhood. And yeah, such and such a neighbor used to live down there, such and such a house used to be there, and they killed their family in 1967. What? What are you talking about? You know, just like this. So, oh, you didn't know that? Obviously not. And so I grew up along with that. And it was, so I started looking into stories like that. I started getting a real taste for it. And when I started getting into writing on my own, it drove me. I just wanted to know. That curiosity was always there. And it's like, I want to know more. And then instead of just hearing about it, I wanted to tell other people about it. I wanted to share those stories. So first of all, they didn't die out. First of all, I enjoy it rather. And secondly, people want to know. People always had that curiosity. And I didn't, yeah, exactly. And I did.
No, they do.
I never want those stories to die out and have to be unburied again. And the more people that know, the longer they live.
Yeah, I think so, because their essence lives on, kind of like, I don't know, I always refer to, I'm sure you know who this is, Kurt Cobain.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
You know, Nirvana or whatnot. And I know that now, knowing what I knew then, I probably now wouldn't be like, hey, teenage daughter, listen to this music, because I understand a little more now. But it got me through the growing pains of being a teenager myself. And I know that, you know, he didn't, you know, pass away in a good way,
right?
Supposedly. But I always feel like it's almost like after someone's gone, either their spirit lives on more through everyone after they're gone. It's more noticed. Their stories are more heard. And I don't know. I think that like it's part of like our culture or where we came from or why, you know, we're here or whatnot, to keep essence going on about what good things a person was known for, or even sometimes bad things, because I do like the murder mystery shows and stuff like that too. I'm intrigued by those.
Oh, yeah.
Do y'all have any books, or you have any books that are geared toward that direction, more of like an investigation or homicide or something like that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mostly write true crime. I guess it's called dark history now. I wrote a book here in 2018. It came out. It was called Murder and Mayhem in Scott County, Iowa. And Scott County, Iowa is where there's a city that straddles the Mississippi River. Actually, it's 4 cities called the Quad Cities, and it deals with the Iowa side of that. And I think the latest one takes place in the 1920s. And these were just bizarre crimes that took place. I mean, there's no real mystery there. There were no necessarily cold cases, but it were things that people didn't know about. They had known, we had in the 1980s, we had a chiropractor murder his wife. He said it was accidentally. He was playing pool and he hit the cue ball. It jumped off the table, hit her in the head and killed her. That's what he said. Now,
Oh,
most of
you
us,
did that.
exactly, and we're all
Unless he
just
was
kind
the
of,
best pool player in the world and he called that shot before he did it, I don't know if that's probable.
and I'm just thinking, how hard do you have to hit someone off the table? I've skipped cue balls off the table and I've never hit
Mhm.
hard enough to kill someone.
No.
Well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was a deadly thing and we all should have dove to the ground. I don't know. But
You're like, it didn't happen, so I don't really know.
exactly. We're going to speculate. So this guy, his name was Clint, was his last name. And instead of doing what most of us probably would have done, is call 911, call for help, call a neighbor, call someone.
Yeah.
He decided, well, you know what? She's dead. I'm going to take her to the garage and dismember her body with a chainsaw and throw her in the Mississippi River. It became a very famous case forensically because all they found, not to get too gruesome, all they found was her torso. And they were able to not only identify her, but convict him of capital murder. And he went to prison for 20 years.
Good.
Oh,
that's not a believable story, even by the most naive person ever. But I know that it still would have to be proven. Like,
oh,
no
yeah.
what. Yeah.
I mean, when he came up with that idea, it's like, come on, man, really? Who's gonna buy this?
Yeah, I watch shows like that all the time, and it sounds like another story. I had heard one time where this guy was like, yeah, me and my wife were driving on this stranded road on a day that we're typically doing something else she's usually at work, and she accidentally, something came through the windshield and killed her. It hit her in the back of the head, but it came through the front windshield, and they were just like not buying this story. They were like, they had been in trial for a very, 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 very long time because they couldn't quite get the proof they needed. But they had, like 3 different people that supposedly he was going there to their house to get them to help with some construction work or plumbing work, and none of those people had been contacted that day. And so something kind of like that reminds me of that story. Now, I didn't get to hear how that ended, but I'm sure he got convicted because none of his alibis checked out with any people or witnesses or people involved.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, there's crimes of passion where somebody just snaps and goes, and so many of these premeditated murders, they think they're so much smarter than they are. It's like, it's not just one guy. You're not going up against Sherlock Holmes. You're going up with a team of trained individuals, investigator, forensic experts. It's like, come on, really?
Yeah, it's more like a team of Sherlock Holmes because I really like a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. Those are my people that I would look to kind of like for weird stuff like that, because I know Conan did more like on the odd. He did that kind of stuff, but like paranormal research too and stuff, and with paranormal investigators. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Do you have a background in paranormal?
Not necessarily. I've always had a very staunch interest in it. I've collected a lot of ghost stories, talked to a lot of people who have shared their ghost stories with me. I've never done any investigating. I was at Gettysburg National Battlefield one time. This is, 10, 12 years ago. And I went on one of their ghost tours and I thought, I'm going to go to the battlefield. The battlefield was open until 9:00 at night. I couldn't believe that. And so I thought, it's pitch black outside. And I thought, I'm going to go find out. I want to try this. And so I'm driving out there and I'm in a rental car, a rather expensive rental car that my dad had rented. And I thought, and it was one of those really super dark, rainy nights. And I just kept thinking, I'm going to wreck this car somehow. There's monuments. There's over 1,000 monuments from different regiments and whatever out there. And I thought, I'm going to go off the road at a curve. I'm going to not only wreck the car, but I'm going to kill like some of these 150-year-old monuments too. I'm just going to go back to the hotel. And that was the closest that I ever came. I'm open to the idea. I've known a lot of people that have, but I just never officially have, and definitely not formally.
Honestly, like I think probably, like based on probably what kind of stuff you write about or whatnot, you're not okay. You are missing out on a lot of stuff, but you're not because there's an avenue that you go down with the stuff that you write. That's just, I guess, just as like interesting, just as rewarding, and just as the work being done or whatever as the same as like, a paranormal investigator does. And then
Sure.
sometimes like even like, have you ever felt like when you were writing a story or you were engulfed in a story of something that was like a dark history or like a dark crime that was created, have you ever felt paranoid or like by getting so involved in this that anything weird or paranormal has happened to you?
Actually, I was writing about a local murder. This lady had a lot of the stories that I write, people had, especially in the late 1800s, early 1900s, people had some kind of mental problem. Uh, Back in the old days, they all just went crazy. I mean, whatever
Yeah.
it was in this lady's case, and I'll skip out a bunch of the story, but her daughter ran off with a much older man. Her daughter was 18, 19 years old, and she ran off with a guy who was 50 or 60, if memory serves. Much older gentleman.
Yeah, like three.
Yeah. And
Probably back
so,
then they could have been her grandpa. You had
so
children
she,
pretty young back then.
yeah. So she runs off to South Dakota with him, and the guy that she was working for, he ended up committing suicide partly because of that. And then her mom falls in this really deep depression. She had some older sons. She had a couple very young daughters. One was 2, one was 4. One was named Meta, one was named Dora. And she was extremely depressed. She was dreaming about her daughter running off, and she was having like confrontations with her daughter in her sleep because her husband would hear her talking in her sleep and talking to her daughter that had run off.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, back then, no one really knew how to deal with this. They didn't recognize the signs. Psychiatry was still
Dreams like that too, and dreams like that usually are a psychic connection or a
right.
psychic warning or a psychic message sent to you by that person if they're in trouble, or a spirit that you know or they knew that's trying to help you through your dream figure out what's going on with that person if there's no connection or like no contact or whatever.
Sure. Well, they should have listened, because all of a sudden, one morning she gets up and she's all happy. And normally this is a major warning sign for severely depressed people, because they don't just snap out of it.
Yeah.
And she was extremely happy. Her sons go out to the field. She keeps the youngest 2 daughters with her in the house. Her husband had to go deliver a load of hogs to a nearby town. So he's going to be back in a couple hours. He gets home. What had happened is that she committed suicide. She had injected these chocolate candies with strychnine, and she fed some of them to her 2 daughters and killed them and laid them out very almost ritualistically in her bedroom. And she laid out a quilt on the floor or a sheet, and then she laid out their funeral clothes, and then she committed suicide by ingesting the same chocolate and just laid down and died next to her daughters. And that's what her husband came home to. When I was writing about that, I was actually living in the Quad Cities. I live a little bit north of there now, but I remember I really had this strange feeling. And in my imagination, maybe it wasn't my imagination, I don't know, I could almost see, her name was Margaretha Nelson, and I could almost see her standing there with her 2 daughters behind me in my living room watching me write this. And I just started getting super depressed and really kind of wigged out. And I remember saving the file, stopping it, and just going to bed. It's like, I don't want anything to do with
use
this.
it as an omen at the moment to pause and like just reflect or like just get some fresh air.
Exactly. It's like, this is just too weird for me. I'm not even sure. I might not have gone back to it for a few days. I don't remember, but it bothered me a lot. I mean, it's a story that bothers you anyway.
I've heard of investigators and I've heard of forensics detectives or forensics investigators and people that go and visit high criminal murderers and stuff in prison to talk to them. I don't exactly know why they do it, because I was started going to school to do that, but I didn't get past like the basics of criminal justice.
Sure.
I thought about going back, but I've heard and I've delved into and like researched and read that like some of those people, when they're dealing with those other people, it's like they actually kind of rub off on you energetically what they've done and the darkness of like, you know the saying, when you stare into the abyss stares into you.
Absolutely.
Kind of like that type of thing. Like there was an investigator specifically, I don't remember his name, but he had been visiting these high, what do you call it, high secure facilities with murderers, and he had been doing it for a long time. And he started having what was described as, and what was thought to be, hey Denise and everybody else, I haven't been ignoring y'all. We've just been having a good conversation. He started getting these symptoms of a incubus or a succubus attacking him at his home in bed. And he was a single person, because some people think that you have to be married for that to happen. And I always tell people, no, you don't. You don't have to be married. It just somehow it just energetically attaches to you or happens to you. But he had felt like that it had to do a lot with these criminals. I think a lot of them were like in there for how do you want to say this, PG-13, like
bad things,
like sexual crimes too,
right?
And he felt like that something that was from them or one of them was following him home. And I thought that was just so crazy that his job was just to be an investigator or a criminal forensics detective or something, you know, and like he's just doing his job. He has no clue about paranormal or no clue about any of that stuff. And this strange thing just starts happening to him. And I just thought that was crazy. That was why I was kind of asking that, because yeah, fixed crimes, Denise said. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've always wondered. I was talking to someone ages ago. I found this crime. I do a podcast too about true crime, paranormal, etc. And
what's it called?
The Kitchen Table Historian.
Sorry, I want to write it down so I can post it in the comments so everyone can look it up if they want to.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Where's it found at?
Pretty much anywhere. Apple, iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher. That was the one I was thinking of.
Okay, sorry.
Pretty much anywhere.
What were you saying?
I wrote about this. I found this crime took place in Southwest Iowa, and I know a lot of your listeners probably haven't ever been to Southwest Iowa. Southwest Iowa is very rural. They're very incredibly nice people. I love visiting down there. I have a lot of friends down there, and you get outside of the major cities, and it's a very rural place. It's more rural than some of the rest of the state. And it's to hear that a crime, what happened is in 1919, a gentleman, he had some mental issues. I mean, it wasn't just like he had some mental issues, but he had some anger issues too. And what happened is that his first wife had passed away. He remarried, had 2 stepchildren. One was 18, one was 12. There were 4 kids. So one was 15. I can't remember how old that son was. There were 2 sons and 2 daughters. And what had happened is that he had threatened to kill him before. He had some major problems, and yeah, great guy. And what happened is that one morning over the breakfast table in January, he just leaned out the back door, grabbed what was essentially a club, and it's very close to Villisca, Greg. It's about 20 minutes as the crow flies. It's an even smaller town than Villisca if you've ever been there. But anyway, what happened is that he leaned out, grabbed a club, and beat 2 of his stepchildren to death right there. And he went out, he attacked his daughter in the front yard. She was 15. She ran out and he attacked her and left her for dead. The wife had gone out to grab some kind of food, and she went out to the lard house, and she came back in, and he ended up beating her to death in the backyard, or it was kind of the side yard. And he let the son go away. He said, "Go get your uncle and tell him what I did today." And
oh my gosh!
So the daughter, the 15-year-old,
one of the kids was alive. He told them to go get the uncle, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was just so bizarre.
What's a blank? I can't say it, but you know what I
mean. Oh yeah, exactly. So the daughter, the 15-year-old daughter, she wakes up and she sees the mother who he had attacked in the backyard. She was still alive, and the stepmother told her, run and get help. So she runs down. This is in the middle of an Iowa winter, and she's running down this gravel road. It was probably dirt back then, and running about a quarter of a mile to the nearest neighbor's house. And she's got this big gash in her head. She's got blood running down her face, and she runs up to the neighbor's door and says, "Dad just tried to kill us all." And what? And so all the neighbors, back in those days, the telephone systems, as they were everywhere, they had what were called party lines, and there were no private connections. So it was kind of like this. Anybody who wanted to pick up, exactly, they could just pick up the phone and listen in. So if they weren't listening in, they spent time calling everybody in the farm neighborhood, because the police were in a town called Corning, which was Adams County. They were about another 30 minutes away. Coincidentally, everything's like 20, 30 minutes away from everything down there. At any rate, so the police show up, a doctor shows up, I think an undertaker showed up, all these people, and there were all these people assembled outside. Well, one by one, the neighbors were coming up to this house, and this is just a rural farmhouse. And the house still stands today. If you drive past it, you'd never know what happened there. Never guess. And the guy comes out and he said, "Yeah, I killed everybody, but I'm not going to prison. I'm finally free of them." And he had a straight razor in his hand. And he said, "You guys come any closer, I have a shotgun in the back door just inside the kitchen, and I'll kill you." Well, finally, he had enough neighbors. There were a couple neighbors that said, "Well, fine, let's see him try." And they just started walking up toward the house, and he took that as his cue. He saw him out the door, and he slashed his wrist and his neck. And he's laying on the back porch, and there's a big pool of blood, and they thought he was
or a priest there that you know of.
No. What happened was the doctor came. They all thought he was dead. There was that much blood, and somebody had said something to him or about him, and they saw his hand twitch. So they got the doctor. The doctor checks for a pulse. He's still alive. So they take him into the living room. And this is where it gets weird we're going to get way weirder. Trust me. We'll get there. In the kitchen, there's these two kids dead, and they died badly. And I'll leave it there. And he's on the living room couch, and the doctor's treating him, and he's looking at the wounds, and he realizes these are just superficial. These are nothing. He's going to be fine. So no pretense that, well, let's sew him up, let's help him. They just grabbed him and hauled him to jail, and just kind of bound him up a little bit, some bandaging or whatever, and just hauled him to jail. So he's convicted. He finally pleads guilty to murder. He goes to prison for however long, and what ends up happening is that they kept the house. You know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. I ruined a good story. Darn it. I hate that.
That's okay, because I'm not really sure what you mean. So they took him to jail they
took him to jail. He pled guilty to murder. He goes to prison. He stays in prison. At that time, he was, this is in the 50s or 60s, he was the longest resident of the main Iowa prison in Iowa history at that time. He was there for like 40 or 50 years. Wow. And they released him on parole finally, and he went to live with the oldest with the 15-year-old girl that he tried to kill, his daughter. She was living in California with her husband at that time, and he went to live with her. Suffice to say, things didn't work out. I was never able to find exactly why, but that had to bother people a little bit. This guy tried to kill me when I was 15. He killed my step-parent. He killed my stepmother. He killed my siblings right in front of me. And in spite of them being stepchildren, they were all really close. So I always imagined, so he finally contacted the Iowa Parole Board, and he said, "Look, I'm tired of living here. I want to come back home to Fort Madison," which is where the Iowa State Penitentiary, it's in Fort Madison, Iowa, in the southeast portion. And he wanted to go back home there, and he died there in the 1960s. So the house was sold, and the family, the stepdaughter or his daughter, his biological children, his son actually grew up to be a farmer. He had a farm of his own north of there. The daughter obviously had moved out to California. The house, the farm belonged to somebody else. They sold it off. And I was talking to a local down there, and she said, "Well, if you believe it, some people say it's haunted. I'm like, oh, really? Well, what's the story?
Where is this now? I need the address. Yeah.
So she told me that according to a friend of hers grandmother, who the house is in nowadays it's in pretty severe disrepair, but I mean it's still standing, probably a little dangerous to get into, but the foundation's going on it. But back then when this friend of hers' grandmother was living there, was younger, I don't know what age, teenager, 20s, whatever. She had lived in the house with her family, and she said they used to hear voices. You could hear people crying, you could hear people talking, and it always got stronger towards winter. And the murder took place in January of 1919. Now, I always thought it was a great story. Now, I've never been able to get into the house or anything, but it was I always thought it'd be real interesting to sit there and talk to anybody else, see if they had experienced anything.
Yeah, it definitely would. Yeah, that would be awesome to be able to do that. But hearing that right there is interesting too. I just wonder why would the girl let him come live with her?
She must have been an awfully good person. I heard that his son, what was odd is that I've talked to several family members, grandchildren of, the son's name was Merlin. And I talked to several of his grandchildren, and they all said, and they contacted me independently, and they said, oh yeah, we knew it. He was a really nice guy. They never wanted to talk about what had happened. We heard that something happened. It was bad, but thanks for writing the story, because now we know. And I had one gal finally write me. She said, just to let you know, he was beloved by his grandchildren. He loved his children. He was an old farmer. Everybody liked him. He was a sweet and gentle man, and he died in his 80s sitting in his favorite easy chair. And I always thought that is just a really sweet story to, kind of end it up and kind of counterbalance his dad. I was glad to hear that didn't continue.
The son? The thing that you got was about their son?
Yes, that was their biological son, the one he let go.
Yeah.
Go tell your uncle.
Yeah. That's crazy. I thought you meant it was about the dad, and I was going to say,
oh no,
his favorite easy chair. He ended up. I feel like when you do something like that, it never stops haunting you. And I know that you can go to prison, and you can go to jail, and you can pray and repent, and you can, be reborn or resaved, and you can. Is it called the Hoskin family murders?
It was.
Okay, that's what Denise said.
Yep, that's it right there. John Hoskins.
That's awesome.
There was another story it was Western. I'm making Western Iowa sound like such a terrible place.
I'm sure this stuff, if you dig deep enough and far back enough, that many different places have some history like this.
Oh yeah. There's all kinds of stories I live in Eastern Iowa, so there's all kinds of stories out here. The Pamela, the son was Merlin, and he was the one that lived to be in his 80s. John died in Fort Madison. He was buried, I think it was 1963, and he's still buried somewhere down there. I've never been down to find the grave. There was another murder that took place. A guy named was William Kelly, and he beat his wife and 2-year-old son to death with a hammer. And then he goes to the gas station. He goes to the police station. This is in the 1930s. He goes to the police station. He's covered in blood. And he just says, kind of reminiscent of the movie Seven, if you've ever seen that, where Kevin Spacey turns himself in and he just comes in all covered in blood. Okay, I'm ready. You got me. And that's what this guy did. He said, I did it. Let's get this over with. And that's exactly let's get this over with.
Mm-hmm.
And so the police go out, they find the body. He's convicted of murder. He goes to another fine inmate of Fort Madison, and he ends up being in prison for even longer than John Hoskins was. And he's paroled in the late 70s. And he went there. He was a model prisoner, and he's released, and he goes to like a halfway house. And it was run by an ex-convict who had gotten out of prison, turned his life around. He married a school teacher, and he wanted someone to help other convicts like himself kind of readjust to life outside.
Yeah.
And he was a really nice guy. And William Kelly didn't really want to be out, but he adjusted, and he was slowly, and he was in his 60s at the time, I believe. And he had been in prison so long that he had never seen an escalator.
That would be weird.
Oh yeah.
Never having seen one.
Oh yeah. It was like he came out into a completely foreign world. I mean, it was like waking up in some kind of futuristic movie for him. And anyway, so he attacked his parole officer with a box cutter because he wanted to go back to prison. Well, he got his wish. The parole officer survived, cut him up real bad. He had an 8-inch gash in his neck, required several stitches, but he survived. And William Kelly goes back to prison. He finally gets so old, it's like a mandatory parole, or at least it was in that time. And he goes to this, I'm not exactly sure what it was. It was not exactly a halfway house. It was made up of a bunch of former convicts for various crimes. It was a place in Des Moines, and it was just a place for them to kind of go and be together, have a place to live. And he ended up living there the rest of his life. It was run by a reverend. And he, toward the end of his life, he always regretted killing his son, he said. And toward the end of his life, he would walk around and he was having conversations. And what it was, when people really listened, he was having conversations with his wife and son. Mm-hmm. And apparently they were talking back to him. At least his wife was. Well, you shouldn't have done that. I should have killed you. I really regret that. But you shouldn't have done what you did. And you shouldn't have done this. And having these conversations. And I always wondered, like you were saying, these events come back and haunt you. It's this form of ultimate karma.
Yeah.
Was it because his mental faculties were going, or was it because there was something there? It always made me wonder.
Mm-hmm. I do feel like there was a murder case here a few years back. And it was in Fort Smith, Arkansas. I'm not going to give like details of people's names or nothing, but we went and investigated the place where the murderer had lived before he committed the murders. It was a guy, and he had long dark hair, and I think he was Native American. I'm not sure, he might have been Hispanic, but I mean, that's not important. I'm not discriminating on anybody's skin color or anything, because the devil doesn't care what you look like or what color you are.
Very true.
He wants all the souls. He don't care what they are. But so he had been living in this apartment that we investigated, and he had been doing sacrificial rituals and like satanic worship and stuff. And there was even like it looked like kind of like bloodstains on the floor and whatnot in this apartment that we investigated. And one night he just got a machete, and he walked out of that apartment and walked up the street. And like I could literally walk to where this happened, and there were these two people sitting on the front porch, and he supposedly knew them. I'm pretty sure that he knew them, and he just hacked them with a machete. And they're having like a beer sitting on the porch in the middle of the night, just chilling, and he just hacks them with a machete. He probably hid it from them, or they probably would have ran when they saw him walking with it. But
sure.
And then when they got him and they arrested him and they were convicting him, he said that the devil made him do it. That was what he said. Plain and simple. The devil made me do it. That he told me I had to do it. Yeah, so I feel like a lot of the time, whether it be that or it be an undiagnosed bad, mental issue.
Sure.
It could be that too sometimes. A lot of the times I think it could be that. But, that stuff just happens. I do think that haunting and like you're going to be haunted by some kind of something's going to happen to you. Because I've studied karma, like I've studied like how karma works, and a lot of the times it just is a repetition of what you put out, and you have to be haunted by that like metaphorically haunted by what you did until you make
Right.
it right. And if you can't make it right, obviously you murdered somebody, they're dead. You can't make that right.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? You can't make that right. You can pray and repent, and you can maybe, have your soul salvaged yourself, but you can't make that right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think with some people, I mean, mental illness aside, there's early onset, late onset, onset by trauma, by some kind of brain injury, sickness sometimes. That influences people in some ways. But I think that sometimes, especially, this individual was contacting something dark out there in the universe. I mean, something bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you start attracting that kind of thing and start flirting with it, looking for influence and opening, well, for lack of a better term, opening a dialogue with it, I think it opens you up to a different kind of influence.
Yeah,
and whether it's a full-on actual possession, or whether it's just, something, like a friend, well, hey, I talked you into riding the really horrible water slide at the water park, just because I thought it was funny. Well, maybe these things, maybe they think it's funny. Well, I'm going to talk into killing these people down the block. I mean, I really believe that kind of thing is out there.
Yeah, I do too. And I've actually kind of encountered it myself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have. Doing, I guess, opening up to do like medium work and stuff like that.
Sure.
And not in the beginning stages knowing how to correctly or securely or safely do that, and to, guard or protect your own energy. Like, I do agree to an extent where some people say, once you start doing that stuff, you're opening yourself up for, evil stuff. You are actually, if you don't go and do the research and the training and the work of actually knowing from the very beginning, before you even think about doing spirit box or doing Ouija board or whatever that you're going to do, before you even think about doing that, you have to actually learn how to ground, protect yourself, and keep yourself close everything out, open everything up, explain, and take, authoritative control over the situation to where whatever is out there, because I think, they're walking around everywhere.
Sure. Oh, sure.
If you don't tell whatever's out there, you're not allowed, you can't sit with us. Sorry.
Right.
Do that stuff, then it will sit with you, and it'll sit closer and closer and closer to you, and it's whispering in your ear.
Wow.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. I've had stuff happen really unexplainable. There's no other explanation, no scientific or, psychological. There's no explanation other than strictly paranormal.
Oh, sure.
Paranormal that happened, and I won't say, it wasn't spirits, or I won't say it wasn't witchcraft that had been involved from somewhere, but yeah, stuff has happened that I would greatly say that last statement you said. Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of strange. We're in the right place for it, but there's a lot of strange things out there. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, because you honestly know a lot more about this kind of thing than I do. But I always kind of likened it to anybody can get in a car and drive, but you almost have to know the rules of the road to do it safely. I mean, you can get in the wrong lane, you can drive through stop signs.
Yeah, and it would be nice if there was even I do think though I was going to say, how you have to take a driver's test to get your driver's license.
Right.
It would be nice, but I do think that at one point that the universe grants you a spiritual test to see if you're ready to do these things before it grants you the gifts or the powers or the abilities to move forward and do whatever that God or angels or the universe would deem you worthy of having on your shoulders as this life mission. I think that there is a spiritual test, and you get snagged up lots of times. Blindly, you get snagged up lots of times by things that you think you're doing good, but you're actually getting yourself into something that you shouldn't have gotten into.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's a big test there. Yeah, but I think, it's like driving a car and knowing how to follow all of the rules of the road, using your blinkers, don't roll past the stop signs, stop at the red lights.
Right.
Yes. Red flags, red lights, red flags. Okay, that would compare in a lot of ways, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. talked to, I've talked to people. I remember one individual, he dabbled in kind of the dark side of things for a while, and he was always very open-minded, and thank you, Greg. And there was, I'm trying to think of how to put this. So he told me that he was always a believer, or that he was a believer in the darker side of things, in this case, demons. And he tried several years before, he had tried, I don't know if it was summoning or kind of like a darker side of witchcraft or what exactly it was. He didn't go into details, and I didn't ask. Mm-hmm. And he said that I've dabbled enough to know it works. And he said, and it was almost like he went far enough, it worked, he got the result he wanted, and it just scared him half to death. He's like, okay, I'm done. That's it. And he quit and walked away. But he always, I believe it works, but it doesn't mean that I want to go live there and kind of dabble in that.
I believe it does too. Like I was saying, how like some people contact me and want help or whatever. I was helping somebody that was doing that kind of stuff, and somehow it energetically and physically was affecting me at my home.
Oh,
and
wow.
Everyone I lived with and things were physically manifesting like,
wow.
It's going to sound crazy, and I'm not the only one that saw it. So I knew I wasn't crazy. After someone else saw it, I almost cried because I was so happy that someone else affirmed that I wasn't just seeing this.
Sure.
But there would be a black cat following me around all over the place, but it wasn't tangible. You couldn't touch it. You couldn't like hear it. It was see-through, like a smoky cloud shaped like a black cat, but it was so molecularly like structural that it looked like, I thought it was a black cat at first. And I just thought,
sure,
what is this black cat? Where'd it come from? I just thought, you see cats running around all the time that people have just like let go.
Sure.
And, the first time I saw it, I didn't think anything of it except it was just out of place. The thought in my mind just popped in my mind, that's kind of out of place. And then the next time I saw it, because it would be like I'd be at a church in the parking lot, and I'd see this black cat. And I was like, what the crap? I'd be driving down a back road, and I'd see a black cat. And then I'd be driving, and I thought, it's probably just a lot of black cats. Maybe it was mating season, and all these cats were born at the same time. I was trying to break everything down in my mind.
Right.
That makes sense. Then it started going like and dispersing into the air and not being, like structurally concrete anymore, not like, adhesive. It was like it would just disperse. And I was like, that is crazy. I am going crazy. I'm out of my mind. And then the next time I saw it, someone else said, did you just see that black cat? And I said, oh my God, thank you so much. And they're like, what are you talking about? I was like, thank you so much that you saw this black cat. And he said, it just jumped off of the porch. And I said, no, it didn't. I said, come here. And I said, look all over the place. Do you see it anywhere? Do you see it down there? And there's a block. You can't go under the porch. It's all blocked off. The underpinning,
Wow.
And I said, look. And I said, it didn't go off the porch. And I said, I've seen this thing like 5 or 6 times. And I was like, I'm just so glad you saw it too.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it literally looked like, I guess the fact that it vanished didn't grasp to the other person, but I had already seen it so many times, and I was like, "Look, do you see it anymore?" No, there's no black cat. Oh, well, maybe I just thought I saw it. No, I saw it too, and I've seen it multiple times. And I felt connected to this person that I was trying to help with their house and some dark energies at their house and things, shadow figures at their house, and they had told me that they had been summoning a warlock and an evil witch. That they summoned these things after I had all these experiences. I was like, can you tell me what's going on? And they told me that, I summoned a warlock and an evil witch. Oh, okay. Thank you for telling me. So
thanks for telling me now.
Yeah.
Jeez. That was something I watched, paranormal shows and whatever. I mean, I've always, been a big fan. And like I said, I've always had a very marked interest in this kind of thing. And I've always wondered that, that whole thing of going in and having something attached to you. And I remember in the very beginning, kind of the evolution is at first it was just stories.
Yeah.
And
the witch trials and stuff.
Exactly. And then it was, well, no, I've never had anything attach itself to me. Nothing bad ever happens. And then here recently, stories like what you told, it's like sometimes things for whatever reason, whether you were trying to help, or sometimes something just, I don't know, takes a liking to you or something, like a stray kid. God, that sounds awful. But, somebody just attaches to you. I'll follow.
Wayward son. Wayward child. I don't know.
I was looking for him. He goes home with so many people. That's what happens to my kids all the time. Anyway, sometimes I wish they would, but at any rate, something follows you home, and more I'm starting to hear stories about that. And I always appreciated that, because it's like, there's nothing keeping them in a place always. And what's to keep them from, maybe they just feel comforted from your presence. Maybe it's something darker, but sometimes, wow, I just thought of a story. I haven't remembered this since I was a kid. Back when I was in my early teens, I had a group of friends, and we were kind of wanting to dabble more. And my best friend's mom at the time had a seance, or she said when she was younger, she used to do seances and things like that. She grew up in the 70s. So, I mean, it was more, that first occult wave, We
don't even know what kind of stuff they'd be doing. It would make us look like the kindergartners of that stuff nowadays, I'm sure.
Yeah, no kidding. And she said they did a seance, her and her friends, and they had summoned the spirit. This is all alleged. The spirit of Janis Joplin. And Janis Joplin allegedly followed her around for, I don't know, a few months, a year, whatever it was. And I just thought of that when I was talking about that. I mean, it's like, I don't know, maybe somebody had looked up Janis Joplin, she got lonely, and, well, hey, I'll hang out with you, kid. Why not? I don't got anything else better to do. So I mean, but yeah, I always appreciated that.
Cool, I guess.
I liked high school the first time around. I'll go with you.
That's funny. I would be like the person that's like, but how did she die when she was here? I don't know if I want her to sit next to me.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, that good energy she had was somehow, like cut off with something that was not good energy. And I would feel like that could even make, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people that get depressed and anxious and stuff. And especially if all of a sudden I feel like, kind of like it could be a spiritual warfare going on inside their self, or it can be, their surroundings too, but
sure. I mean, it could be a combination of things. Who knows?
Yeah. Might be my overthinking, but I'd be like, oh, she was cool. I'd tell her she could come hang out. And then when, the fun was over, I'd be like, you got to go back now. Sorry, Janice.
Yeah, no kidding.
I'll see you again someday.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. We'll talk then. Right now, no.
Yeah,
that's go.
But yeah, that would be interesting. I've seen also there's a lot of investigators and stuff that have on YouTube, like, oh, I connected with the Beatles, or I connected with Jimi Hendrix, or such and such. And I haven't watched them, but I'm kind of curious to watch them and see how that turned out.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I'd always be afraid of like a house guest. It was really cool to have them for a couple hours, and then they never go home. Like, hey, can I crash at your place tonight? Well, sure, bud, no problem. And then they crash there for the next month. It's like, look, man, it's really time. I'll pack up my stuff to go this afternoon. And then you come back this afternoon from work and they're still there. It's like, okay, I'm going to become one of my own stories, and I'm going to make this memorable. It's time for you to go. Yeah.
I do feel like spirits can do the same thing as humans. Like they could overstay the world. Yeah. Once you open that door and say, come on in, then it might be too late. That's funny. Pamela does hypnosis. She's a hypnotherapist.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting field.
Yeah. She's been on the Paranormal United Network several times on a couple of different shows.
Oh,
interesting stuff. Yeah. She does some interesting stuff. I was going to ask, what are some other works? This sounds totally random because of what we've been talking about, but like, really, that happens though in the shows. You get to talking. Do you have some, like, name some of your works and where people could find them at, like if they wanted to check out anything that you've written?
Absolutely. Obviously, my new book is called Eerie Quad Cities, written with my co-author, Mr. Michael McCarty. It's about ghost stories, cryptids, paranormal stuff. There's even a chapter on UFOs in there from around the Quad Cities area. If you're from the region, it's even more cool because it's like anything else. If you're from the region, it's like, oh, wow, I know that. But even if you're not, I think there's a lot of really good stories in there. A lot of just good stories. And my former book, as I mentioned, was Murder and Mayhem, Scott County, Iowa. It's from the same region in southeast Iowa, all true crime stories that have taken place. There's 7 of them written from a period of roughly I want to say late 1800s, 1890 something, all the way up through 1920s. And then my first book, I co-authored with my dad. My dad and him and I always had this idea. It's like, hey, let's co-author a book together. We ought to do this. We ought to do this.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so he contacted me one day. It's like, hey, I contacted a publisher. We're writing a book. Oh, okay. And so it came about. And so if you're permitted, I got a quick story about it. Talking about titles. I know we were talking about that before the show. Yeah. He comes in, and what it was about various people buried in the local cemeteries. All these people that had done, I mean, there were people that had committed murders. There were the infamous people. There were famous mayors, people that are big businessmen, all this kind of cool stuff. Well, he comes down and he gives me this sheet of paper one day from the publisher. And he says, oh, hey, they want a title. It needs to be in by tomorrow. I put down my idea. You do what you want. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I start reading it through. His title was Scott County Dead People. Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, it fits, but there's no way I'm naming my first book Scott County Dead People. Yeah. So I thought, I put my little thinking cap on, and I figured, I got it. It's going to be Scott County Cemeteries. This is great. Yeah. It ended up being this horrible title because everybody thinks that it's yeah, absolutely. I don't know, we'll put up an email or something. We'll figure that out.
Bad title because
I'm sorry. I get distracted easily. Squirrel and all. Anyway, so I looked at it. When the book came out, everybody thought it was about the cemeteries in Scott County, Iowa. And it had nothing to do with the cemeteries. It had everything to do with the people in. And I spent the signings and everything I did sitting and explaining, this is what it's about. And I told Dad later, I've told him for the past 10 years.
You should your name.
Yep, you were right. I should have gone with it. But that's another book. It's a nice, what I'm told is it's a great bathroom book. You read a couple entries at a time, and then you walk away for a while, and then, like that. And, yeah. But I've written that. I've written some magazine articles. Those are a little harder to come by. A lot of my stories can be found on my podcast, Kitchen Table Historian. You can find that in any of your podcast outlets. I know we kind of touched on this earlier, so here I am plugging my own show again on your show. I apologize. That's
fine. You can say wherever the platforms that you can find it.
Okay, but that was a lot of them. I have transcriptions on my website, johnbrassardjr.com. And so if you don't want to listen to the stories, you can read the stories. But that's where a lot of my work comes from. The Hoskins family, I published it on a website called The Lineup back in 2019, 2018, whatever it was. And but a lot of the other ones like William Kelly, that's found on my website.
That last book you're talking about with you and your dad was Scott County Cemeteries?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I just wanted to put the names of them in case someone wants to go back and they want to rewatch it and look for those names.
Oh, sure.
Comments if they want to go back and look. And then I'll have to check out the website too.
Thank you.
some of these questions I asked because I didn't know if you had done paranormal investigation. That one's no.
I know. I feel terrible. I feel.
You don't have to have done that. I just was, I guess, assuming.
Does it sound weird? I mean, I'm feel like I'm paranormal curious, one of those things. It's like I've always wanted to go, but I've never quite gotten there,
There's a lot of people. There's probably more people that are curious than people that have ever done it, I bet. I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure.
Sorry. Yeah.
No,
She
you're
was also
fine.
saying something I was looking at, and I think, oh my gosh, that don't even make sense. I said, you're welcome.
You're fine.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I already asked you how you do, like what inspires you or whatever. What do you do if you ever get writer's block in the middle of a book?
That's a good question. Sometimes I walk away for a little while because sometimes it's just overload, especially if you're on deadlines or things. I mean, sometimes with deadlines, you just got to gut up and push through. I mean, it's just like, I didn't write anything down, and you put it out there and you come back. That's why editing is so important. You come back later and I don't know what I was thinking, but let me see if I can't rework this. And it works out good. Other times, if I have the time, my biggest thing is I walk away for a little while. Matter of fact, the latest thing I was working on, I wrote an introduction to it. I had an afternoon. I'm going to write an intro to it. And I wrote it. And as I was writing it, I was thinking, this is garbage. I hate this. I hated every word of it. I hated every step. Nothing was coming off. But I forced myself to write it because it's like, I'm bound determined I was going to make it work. And I got it done. And I walked away. And because of circumstances, I walked away for a little longer than I thought. I walked away for a couple days. And the way my brain works, I just kind of kick it around my head for a while. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of there. And as I'm going through my day, it kind of filters through. And I started reworking it. And I thought, no, this is the intro I want to do. And then you go back and you write that. It's like, okay, this flows a lot better and this works. But that generally works for me.
Yeah, you just give it a breather and you have those aha moments.
Oh, absolutely. You just kind of let things cycle through and unwind themselves, and kind of like a knot that works itself out.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Sometimes they don't work out as quick as you want to get the knot out. I make jewelry.
That is so true.
I was actually trying to help my daughter get a knot out of some hemp. And I was like, this is not coming out. Throw this piece away and get a new one. This knot's not coming out.
Exactly.
Writers do that. I'm sure they just like scratch it and start over from, the beginning. Again, visit the whole entire story or whatever. But is there anything that you do while you're writing that like helps you get into the mood or into the story, or helps you get in? I don't know, like the characters of who you're writing about, like coffee or tea or like some kind of Mozart or anything like that you do that's like a writing ritual, I guess, that you do?
I don't necessarily have a ritual. Now, I personally think coffee is a food group. So, I mean, I always have a cup of coffee somewhere. So coffee is a great thing. I like to have something to drink, especially, I mean, if you're podcasting or doing something like this, you almost need it a little bit. Mm-hmm. Then you start making the unfortunate mouth sounds and you go back and watch it later. It's like, oh my God, what did I do? But I like a little music. I like music without words, because if I listen to music with words, I don't know. Some people like dead silence, and I don't necessarily like that, because I'm always on edge. I'm always waiting to hear something in the background. I need a fan or something like that going. And normally what I do, I like music without words. Like you said, Mozart, some kind of classical. I'm a child of the 80s, so I kind of dig the synthesizer music too. Like dark synth or something. It's like, this is cool. I'm 80s cool writing my story,
Yeah, I've heard that if you listen to music with words, sometimes it can influence the writings or whatever. It can influence your work. And
I remember... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I paint and stuff, and sometimes I do feel like if I listen to music with words a lot, like while I'm doing a painting, I do feel like sometimes it influences the art, but I don't feel like it's in a bad way. But that's art. It's not writing. So,
I remember talking to a gal years ago, and she told me that she was doing a transcription for somebody. She was writing, they were Civil War records. It was somebody's diary, or if it was official accounts of whatever they were doing that day. Anyway, she's transcribing them, and she's writing, and she was listening to some song, and she's just typing away and typing away. And she went back to something didn't look right. She goes back to look at it. Oh, she was writing the words to the song as she was going through.
That's why I could see how that might affect you. But like painting, you can't really, unless you put words on your paintings, and I know you can't really paint the words to the song. You could like take the emotion of the song and, kind of like interpret it. So I feel like that would work better, but you can interpret it on the canvas or whatever of what you're hearing, but you can't really, put the words on there.
Oh, sure.
Plagiarism, probably. She didn't notice that. Who knows? Here's Pamela. So writing is an art form. I love listening to music without vocals, painting, but not writing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. I mean, I think everybody has what they go into. I mean, I've talked to people that they can listen to anything. Some people like dead silence. Some people want to be in a room completely without distraction. Some people can they don't have a choice. They learn to write with a bunch of people in the room, running around, making all kinds of noise, and they can just go into this Zen place and just type away. Me, I've never been quite that good. I've always wanted that ability, but I've never had it.
She's absolutely fine. She said, "I'll shut up now." I'm like, "No, you're fine. We like the participation. That's why we're doing the show."
Right. Yeah. This is
to discover and put ourselves into it too. You can interject. We don't care.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. I've never, like I was telling you, your listeners don't know, this is my first live stream. So, I mean, this is kind of an interesting experience for me. I'm digging it. This is fun.
Yeah, it's good. And it was kind of like my fault, but we were supposed to do it at 11 and some stuff happened. So that's all I'm going to say. Some stuff happened, but, hey, the show must go on. That's my motto. Like Jason, he had commented earlier, he works all night, so that's why he's not doing this one with me, but he does the shows on Monday nights with me. But he works graveyard shift and gets off at like 7 something in the morning. But
I'm a night shifter too, so I completely understand and sympathize.
Even if we have a guest that's not going to show up and they tell us like 10 minutes ahead of time, I'm like, the show must go on, Jason. We're going to do it anyways. And we'll just talk to the people in the crowd. We'll just talk to the people that are watching.
Oh, sure. That's kind of a cool thing.
Mm-hmm. Or pull something out of a hat. Like sometimes you can throw it in the group chat room and say, hey, does somebody want to be on? Anybody have anything to talk about? And then just invite one of those people on.
Yeah. I was... Yeah, it's very different being on live. I did a lot of events where I used to like it. Now, obviously, this is all pre-COVID. When I first started, I did a lot of live events. I mean, people wanted me to come, and first it started with books. It also led to, so when I wrote Scott County Cemeteries, I contacted one of the local cemeteries, and they were, at the time, we were really friendly. And they said, and they had a public speaking forum once a month. And they said, well, why don't you come out and be part of that? And we'll hawk your book and all that. I'm like, okay, cool. This sounds neat. But I'm thinking, you're at a cemetery. Where on earth are you going to do it at a cemetery? Well, they had a big walk-in, one of the big mausoleums there on site. And that's where we spoke. That's where it was. It was crazy. I mean, it was really kind of neat.
Wake the dead.
Yeah, no kidding. And that ended up being the strangest venue I've ever done.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you can quite top that one. There's
cool though, because if you think about it, I'm sure one of your books does talk about being in a cemetery and visiting one. That would be like the illustration of that book coming to life. Oh yeah, here with that background or that painted image. Why you're talking about the book? One of the screenplay.
Oh yeah, in the new book we wrote about a place. It's it's another great big cemetery in the area. It's called Fairmount, and Fairmount I'm trying to think of what it is now. I mean, it's over 80 acres. I mean, it's this huge place, and a lot of it's wooded. It's right on the outskirts of Davenport. A lot of it's wooded. I mean, it's a beautiful place, but it has one of the oldest crematoriums west of the Mississippi River. And the way it was set up, cremation wasn't very popular for various and sundry reasons for a long time. And in the late 1800s, it started gaining in popularity, starting in Germany. And Davenport had a huge German population and a very strongly Germanically influenced population at that time. And so they pushed for a crematory. And they finally got their wish, and they put it in Fairmount Cemetery. And it's this big brick building, and you go up this set of stairs, and you go up, it's this great big open room. Well, what it was designed to be was that was a chapel. So the crematory, the oven is actually in the basement of the facility. So you walk up the stairs, you go in, it's this great big open area. That was the chapel. And there's some pictures they have on site of it all decked out. It's really neat looking. You walk in now, it's like, oh, great. It's a big empty room. Ooh. Mm-hmm. But back then, I mean, when it was all flowers and everything is so cool. Well, in the middle of the room is this raised platform. And you can tell that's where the casket went. So you would set out all the chairs, and the reverend would do the service, or whoever would do the service. And then, so what it was designed to do, this is where it gets cool, is that after the service, everybody leaves. Well, it's time to, do the deed, so to speak. And so it's this big, the platform actually lowers through the floor. It's a big crank system down in the basement, and you turn this crank and it lowers the platform down into the floor. And then the oven is right there, and you just scoot them right over. And it was really cool. And I remember the first time I ever went out there, I stopped there, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. And I talked to him about it. And the gal, she had a slow day at the office, and she took me on a tour of the facility, and she was explaining all this stuff. And she told me, and in case you're wondering, yes, I can't remember if it was her husband or business partner or whatever it was. I laid on the platform, and he lowered me through the floor.
Oh my gosh.
But I always thought that would be a really cool venue. I mean, that if I was going to ever,
as long as there's no possibility of you burning.
Yeah, exactly. That
they have to have a boiler room, or they have to have some kind of fire, some ignition system that actually sparks the oven to turn it on. As long as you know that's not going to happen, then I don't have problems laying with a cat in a casket. I don't want to be
I always thought that if I was going to top that mausoleum bit, I mean, have like a bunch of dry ice, maybe a couple of like flame jets, like from a concert, and then rise up through the floor and give my little spiel. I always thought that would be great. But
with an open coffin behind you, no?
Yes. Or even better yet, come up in the coffin and open it up as I come up. Like
or
that would be great.
Maiden. Like an iron. Is that what it's called? An Iron Maiden is the actual.
Oh, that'd be cool too. Yeah, with the spikes. Yeah. I could dig this.
Yeah.
I might talk to him and make this happen. I wonder how much I'd have to pay him.
Yeah, there's a place not far from here, and they have festivals all the time, and they have a thing that you can pay to go inside of, and it's called the torture chamber, and it's nothing but contraptions from medieval times and a picture and an explanation of how they use that item to torture people and why someone would get tortured by that.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it has the Iron Maiden in there, and then it's like the most painful one to me is like this really pointy metal. Like if you ever have seen a crystal, like it looks like this. See this?
Yeah,
but it's metal and it's very pointy, and they would hover the person over it and bind them and lower them on it.
Ooh.
To where that would go, you know where. To get them to tell what they wanted to know, and I was like, oh my gosh.
I think I'd tell them just about anything they wanted to hear.
Yeah, me too. Because yeah.
You know, I was.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say they had another thing where you're laid on this table, I guess, and your all fours are tied by rope and they're connected to cranks, and they just start to pull your bones out of socket. It's like several different ones. That's the ones that pop in my mind, though. Go ahead.
That's rough. The way people came up with torture devices, it just, who on earth thought of this?
Probably some crazy people, but I would say that they were probably very effective.
I would say, like I said, it'd work on me.
Mm-hmm.
At Fairmount, halfway up the hill. So we sit, Davenport and Bettendorf, at least partly, they sit in the Mississippi River Valley, which means there's big bluffs that roll up the hill. Well, the city started down by the river and then it grew up the bluff as it went. And Fairmount actually is a cemetery. It starts off, the crematory sits down on the flat part, and then the cemetery actually goes up the bluff as it goes. And then there's a huge, at the top, it actually goes back quite a ways. And halfway up, so the road comes in and then it goes up at an angle like this as you go wind up towards the top of the river bluff. And halfway up, there's these 6 mausoleums. Maybe it's not 6, it's 4 or 5 mausoleums back in there. And they're actually built into the hill. It kind of cuts back in. Yeah. And they haven't been used for a long, long time. And occasionally, all cemeteries, especially old cemeteries, have had some kind of vandalism done to them at some point in their history.
Yeah.
And Fairmount, unfortunately, has had more than its fair share. And at one time, actually on 3 separate occasions, someone's broken into those mausoleums. And the last one was, they thought it was some kind of person coming in looking some kind of ritualistic purpose, because they had broken into the mausoleum and the body was just strewn, like somebody had taken the deceased and just tossed it around the room. And they didn't go too much into details, but I mean, it was almost like it was in pieces.
Did you ever read of them finding any evidence of anything like that in one of those mausoleums that are up? Like built into the wall?
In that one, no, but I heard a story from another cemetery where they had, and it's a very private story, so I'm not going to go too much into detail, but they had
like a vision of like something like that happening in one of those.
Oh yeah.
That's why I'm asking. I'm like, what is that? I don't know. I see it like.
They had broken in apparently with, apparently there were obvious occult signs in one of these mausoleums back in another cemetery. So I mean that people would go into it for that purpose. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine had told me that he grew up down in the area of Fairmount, and he told me that when he was a teenager, him and his friend, Fairmount doesn't have gates that close, or at least it didn't back then. And so the locals would go up there and cruise and hang out and do whatever kids.
Beer.
Exactly.
From the police or whatever. Yeah. I bet.
And he said that him and a friend had pulled up there one night, and they go to the top, and there's this van parked there, and there's a couple guys digging open a grave.
Oh my
and
God.
They saw him. They kind of stopped for a minute because, I mean, it takes a minute to process it. These 2 guys saw him and jumped in their van and started chasing him. So they got out of there, and these people like chased him through the west end of Davenport for far too long for their comfort. And they were able to, I mean, it was almost like it turned into an 80s action movie. And he said that they were able to kind of swing into a back alley and turn off all their lights, and the van just kept on going. And I mean, it was a high-speed chase. He said they were going like 80, 90 miles an hour down through there.
It's kind of crazy that they chased them when they weren't doing anything wrong.
Oh, yeah. It's like, what? I don't know what you're doing, guys. We're not going to help you, and we're just going to go now.
I'm just going to go right now. That's what I would have been like, and I'm not going to say anything. Just, yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. You leave, no high-speed chases. You leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. How's that?
Yeah, I don't know. I just saw like a vision of that, something like that happening, like, and also like it makes me think about like when people do some kind of rituals or whatever. There's like necromancers or whatever, necromancy and different stuff like that. I don't know like all the details about that kind of stuff, but like I don't know. I felt like someone was trying to do something like that in my like third eye. I guess I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Like I felt something like that happened there.
Yeah, I've heard somebody a hand of glory mentioned, like it looked like somebody had tried to make one at one of the cemeteries. This is stuff that you don't think of. We're a big area for Iowa, but we're certainly not like, a bigger city like Chicago or anything like that. And in bigger cities like that, I think it's a little easier to imagine that happening in a cemetery. But out here, it's like, what? People were doing what? Where?
I can't remember what that is, but I've read about it.
It's hand of glory is it's an occult item. You make it out of the hand of a corpse, and you light all 5 fingers, and it's like a candle type thing, and it's supposed to help you evade detection or grant wishes. Depends on what kind of folklore you're going through.
Yeah, or what country, what background, what
exactly.
Yeah, like Viking or Scottish or Irish or whatnot.
Right, right.
Those museum things up there, I've seen stuff like that before.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wondered if they were what they were. Like I used to go to Greece.
Oh, okay.
See them up in the marble, in the or whatever is created from volcanic ash there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all the rock and stuff like that. And I used to see them up there all the time, looking down on the flat place that we were at. And I always thought, I didn't know what they were. And I asked some of the local natives, and they said that they were churches and stuff. But they're like wide open, but everything's wide open there. They didn't have walls. Like they just had the pillars of the basic structure, and then the ceiling, and maybe a little bit of some kind of outside walling that had lavish chiseled designs in it, but they didn't have all the walls like we do and the flooring like we do and all that stuff. But they had said that they were churches and that they weren't used anymore. And I was like, I wonder if that's really true, if they all were or not, when you were telling that story.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. That's crazy.
I was out in a very rural cemetery, way north of the Quad Cities. It was extremely rural, and I was involved with a rural cemetery commission several years ago, and it was a couple old timers, and they used to take me out to all these different cemeteries. And there were a couple that was, it was almost like you were driving through a cornfield, like a path cutting a cornfield. And there was one that we went to. It was outside of a very small town in doesn't matter where it was at, but you go out there and there's a fairly large cemetery back there. And I remember they took me out there for the first time, and they're explaining to me how they had initially found it. And one of their things that they were really proud of is that they had gone to these cemeteries. They were neglected for a long time, and they went in I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, and they had cleaned a lot of them up. And they had cut trees out of them and cut down the grass and all kinds of stuff. And they were telling me about this. And as I look over, there's these two or three stones in a row. And, normally there's grass in between headstones. We've all been to cemeteries. Well, instead of grass, it looked like someone had like it was a cement pad large enough to park a car on.
No.
And I'm just looking at it. Yeah, it was just
in between them.
Yeah, it was just, there were a couple of these, like one in run row and then one in front. And I asked them, so they're going on, and I'm just listening to them, and it was interesting. And I finally, when they get done, I asked them, so what's with the car pad? And they told me a story, and I went and researched it. What had happened is that back in, I want to say sometime in the 90s, these locals were riding ATVs through the area, and they had found one of the graves dug up. And so they contacted the sheriff. They came out, and someone had tried to rob one of the family plots. And so they went out there and
with
they found out.
Or no, with the body in or out of it?
It was in. They weren't able to open the coffin. They had either gotten disturbed or something. Yeah. And the coffin was unopened, but they could tell they had gotten down that far. Not only could they see it, but there were actual footprints on top of the coffin from they had gotten down in the hole. So they went through, nobody was ever found. Nobody was ever convicted, obviously. But what had happened was a couple of the local guys, the family who it belonged to, he had some old rolls of like big fence wire that he's like, well, they're not going to try this again. So he threw all that down there and then reburied them. And when you look at it, there's like a mound over the grave now. And then somebody else decided, well, they're not going to do it to my relatives. And they laid down the big concrete pad on top.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, strange things happen.
Cemetery and like some of the old cemeteries, they have built around them with large limestones. They have built a rectangular structure around them, and they have laid very heavy limestones on top of the gravesite of the person, where like right above where they're actually buried, so that no one can disturb them or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was
fences around some of them, but I don't think that would keep them from getting into the fence, really.
Right. Yeah, there was it reminds me in our book, Erie Quad Cities, there was an individual, his name was William Orndorff. He was an extremely large man. They call him the Giant of Scott County. He was over 6 foot tall. He weighed, when he died, they actually weighed him. He died of the the Spanish flu in 1918. And he weighed over 700 pounds. But he's a big guy. And he was a big guy anyway, but I mean, obviously big in more ways than one. And he had, for most of his adult life, he died in his 40s. But for most of that time, he was extremely agile. He could jump up and click his heels together. He could do all kinds of amazing things that you would look at a guy like that and think, there's no way a guy that big would be able to do it. Well, he could and did. When he passed away, they had him, he was buried in a rural cemetery, and it's not as rural as it was. Back when I was growing up, it was a rural cemetery, but now everything's growing up around it. And it's what they did, they transported him. He was so heavy and so big that, according to the source, depending on which one you get to, some people say it was a custom-made coffin from another town to accommodate him. Some people said it was a piano box. So I suppose it's kind of a custom coffin. Either way, they put him in that, and they hauled him about 5-10 miles from his family. Lived in a town in the next county over. And that's where they held the funeral, because he would never married, never had kids. And so it was where his brothers and sisters were at. And so they had the funeral there. They bring him by flatbed truck all the way down to the cemetery. And it took 12 guys to be his pallbearer to lift the weight. And they actually had a block and tackle system that they lowered him into the grave with. And when you were talking about the big slabs of limestone, that's all I could think of is, it had to have been the same kind of process.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that was pretty hard for people to lower down, because I mean, like lifting it and putting it on your shoulder, and you have more is not as hard as bending over and lowering something down without breaking your arms off when it's that heavy.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, that's kind of neat though to know, and interesting, and it's cool that he could click his heels together. He was talented.
I mean, it goes back into, how it was. I like weird stories like that. Unusual people that, I mean, most people don't remember him, and they called him, it's not politically correct now by a long shot, but they called him Fatty Orndorff because, well, he's, large guy. And he was fine with that. He didn't have an issue with that. He was just such a unique character in our history, and a lot of people don't remember him now. And, to my mind, we put him in there because he was the Giant of Scott County, but and I grew up not too far away from where he lived his entire life. And so he was kind of a local legend for us.
Yeah. I like stories like that.
Oh yeah. I figured not everything, the strange and unusual comes in so many ways, shapes, or forms. You know, it doesn't always have to be supernatural or UFOs, you know, from beyond or anything like that. But sometimes the natural world is just as weird.
It can be like preternatural. I don't know what you call it.
Right.
Yeah, like where it happens biologically or it happens, you know, science or human procreation or whatever. Yeah, I have some books about people that have, I guess what you'd call like repetitive generational, I guess you'd call them a defect, but not really because I don't look at them that way. But like a repetitive generational condition in their family, like, you know, the crab guy that had the crab hands.
Oh,
and then
the lobster boy
had the same thing, and then lobster, and then the dog-faced boy, and he met. And it was some kind of, you know, hair condition or follicle condition or, you know, like hair growth condition all over his body. And he had children and they had the same condition, and Siamese twins that met the Siamese twins and married each other.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I always like to read about stuff like that. I've always been highly intrigued by stuff like that. I was joking, say I was a carny in my past life. A ringmaster or part of a circus or a carnival or something. I joke about that a lot. So I kind of feel like I might have been, like, to be so, like, interested in that stuff. But, yeah. So did you guys ever go visit where he's buried at?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I had been out there before. I was the one that I had written about it previously, and it was Mike's idea to include it in the book. And we had, as a matter of fact, there's some stills in the book, you know, author photos or whatever. And he's like, oh, this will do. And so we actually took our author photos out in the same cemetery, not too far away from his grave. The original story I wrote, it was called Little Stone for a Big Man. And the stone is maybe like a foot high by a foot across. And if you're not paying attention to it, you'll easily skip past it. But I mean, for such a, you know, it's weird how that happens sometimes, is how such somebody who's so much larger than life gets, I mean, that's their headstone, that's their monument. All it says
or
is
a broken one.
Exactly.
Or one that's down in the ground and it's falling over and it's kind of like submerged in dirt, and you're like,
oh yeah.
I will even go out there, and I used to like sweep them off or brush them off so that you could see the name at least. And at least if someone was looking for that person, like they could find them. Yeah. I think some people do what they can when they maintain cemeteries, and I know that sometimes it has to do with whoever's able, or, you know, like physically able, or funds or whatever, or that have been put into the upkeeping of cemeteries. But sometimes I do find cemeteries that I feel like I wish that they, like when there's headstones hidden back in an area that's grown up and there's shrubbery and plants grown up over them and you don't even know that they're there. You just only find them because you're looking for them.
Right, exactly.
Like, man, they need to uncover those, which I guess their families don't know. Maybe they're all passed on and they don't have any more family.
Oh, sure. That happens too.
Visit them and stuff. So, yeah, that's kind of sad though. I used to like to preserve or help preserve cemeteries. I've hung out in a lot of cemeteries. Even when I was a teenager, I'd just go hang out in cemeteries. And I don't know why. I just was a weird kid in school that I'd just hang out in a cemetery and think it was neat, you know?
Oh, not at all. I mean, the modern cemeteries, I mean, they're more than just a place to bury the dead. I mean, they were meant to for a garden spot, to picnic or just take a walk. I mean, a lot of these bigger cemeteries, and I'm sure it's the same where you're at, where you'll see people run through cemeteries or walk their dogs or whatever down the paths.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's that way a lot now. I mean, it was that way a lot then too. It was designed so you can go in, you can appreciate it, you can remember the dead. They're not, you know, put somewhere off in the cornfield somewhere or buried in an unmarked grave. You know, that they can be remembered and appreciated. And, you know, some weird guy like me comes around, who's that? I'm going to go find out.
I like to either try to see if I could pick up anything, because that's how I started doing investigating, is going to cemeteries and trying to contact spirits and stuff like that, or see if I felt like I got communication from them. But I mostly started going there when I was younger, just because I liked the headstones, the structure of them, the wording on them. I even used to do grave rubbings and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
if they have mausoleums there, or if they have those big shrines that's over a person's graveside that are built just for that person, or
Right.
sometimes the mausoleums are really neat to look at. I don't know. I meant to ask you
Oh
a
yeah.
question a while ago, and it popped out of my mind. That one
Sure.
cemetery you were saying, it was Fairmont, right, where they had the crematory? Is
Yes.
that Fairmont?
Mhm.
Was that in any way affiliated with Masonics?
No, actually.
No.
Um, there were Masons that were buried there, but when it was initially formed, when it was initially formed in the mid to late 1800s, Davenport was growing very rapidly, and they thought for sure that Davenport in the next 10, 20 years, whatever it was going to for sure grow out that far. It turns out they were wrong. It eventually got there, but even today, as large as Davenport and the Quad Cities has gotten, it's still on the very outskirts of it. And so it was a group of German businessmen that had gotten together. Now, this is where it ties more into your question. A lot of these guys during that time period, they were involved in fraternal organizations such as the Masons. There were a lot of prominent businessmen, doctors, lawyers, whatever, that were Freemasons. It was a huge fraternal organization that had a vast membership worldwide. If it wasn't the Freemasons, it could be the Odd Fellows. It could be, any number of other fraternal organizations that, I mean, when I was growing up, I remember Freemasons, and I remember Masonic halls, but even then it was starting to kind of die out. And nowadays, a lot of it has, especially in America, it's really gone by the wayside for various reasons. But I mean, back then, yeah, it could have very well been, it may not have been openly Mason or Masonic rather, but it could have been their influences, in their discussions. How do we want to lay this out? How do we want to organize this? It was influenced by Freemasonry. It could have very well been, but there's no documentation of that, unfortunately.
It just reminds me of when you said that they put the coffins on the slab and then they lowered them down. I know that Masons always have their own funeral processions for their members. And I don't know if they bury them there or not. It probably is determined by someone, like the next of kin or whatnot, or signing of something saying, yes, I'll be buried here. I don't know. I haven't gotten that far in the research, but I do know that they had their funerals for their members there at the temple. And that made me think of a big slab that I've seen before in one of the red rooms. That they had a Bible on it, but there's a slab in every room and in several other rooms. And I was like, I wonder if the lower floor has one of those underneath.
Right.
There. Next time I go back, I'm going to look.
There were, my first experience I was never a Freemason, and I didn't know many. For a while there, I did. When I was in my mid to late 20s, I actually just kind of ended up working with a whole lot of them, and didn't realize that until about a year into it, where I found out that, wow, a lot of these guys are Masons. Okay. And really nice guys. But I remember my first experience with ever being like a Masonic hall was there was a place in Rock Island, Illinois, which is one of the Quad Cities, right across the street from, or right across the Mississippi River from Davenport. And it's a place, it's actually in the book. It's called Skellington Manor. And the first time I was in there was in 2003. And it was before it was Skellington Manor, and which is like an event venue. They have a haunted house there. Or they did pre-COVID. Anyway, I remember going through it. A lot of the Masonic trappings and things were still there. And I had no idea what any of it meant. No idea what any of this was. And I remember it's this huge building, and you go back in some of these places and it's kind of dark woodwork and paneling, and they'd have these old Masonic portraits on the walls of previous members. And it felt like one of those, like a Scooby-Doo haunted house experience where you're walking through, you expect the eyes to follow you.
Or the haunted mansion or something.
Yeah. It was kind of a creepy place, but I think it was just that it was so different that it was just like, I feel like I should be creeped out here.
I get intrigued more, like why is that like that, and what is the reasoning behind it? What was the purpose for it, and is it connected to anything else, like I go way out there like, is it connected to Stonehenge or
Oh
the
yeah.
Egyptian tombs and all of that stuff connected like they say it is on those shows, What was the
Right.
purpose of like, the Winchester House and the way that it was built? I don't know. I just always go off and it's like rabbit hole.
Oh no, absolutely. It's a neat place. I mean, the Freemasons, I mean, they're an open order. I mean, they don't kill you for revealing secrets or anything, but it's kind of like, there's certain things you don't talk about, like your financial records. You'll talk about it with your wife or with your spouse, whatever, but you don't, just go up to the guy in the drugstore and, so did you know what my bank account holds? It's just a private thing.
Which really shouldn't do that anyways.
Exactly.
Unless you want to get, unless you want to disappear.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's not smart, but
No.
Well, I was going to go ahead and I put the kitchen table historian on here. I was wanting to put all your platforms on here in the comments real quick, but I wanted to double check. I wrote them down. You said Apple, iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher.
Stitcher, pretty much anything, all your Android apps, all your Apple iTunes apps, any app you can think of, I'm on pretty much all platforms available.
Okay.
The podcatcher that I go through, I can't think of the correct term for it, but I broadcast to a lot of them. You can find me on Amazon. You can find me on, pretty much anywhere you can find the Kitchen Table Historian podcast. And on Facebook, because you mentioned platforms, you can find me under the Kitchen Table Historian there as well. And I'm pretty active on Facebook. My other stuff, I'm there, but not quite so much. I'm no good at Twitter.
Title? Same title on YouTube? Is that what you just said?
Yep, that's correct.
I was listening to you, but without actively like writing what you were saying.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
All right. Well, it's been about an hour and a half, so
oh no, you're fine. Go ahead
and make sure I put all the stuff at the end of the show. I like to make sure again and put it there just so, like they don't have to dig through all the comments. If I put it at the end, I'm about to sneeze. Sorry if I do.
No, you're fine.
Really good conversation.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Some stories, and if you hear back from your co-author friend and he wants to do another show in October, just get back to me and let me know. And I have several dates open for October, Monday night interviews. So just get back to me and let me know.
All right. I absolutely will.
Yeah. Thank everybody who's been watching. It's been awesome. Y'all were great participants.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.